Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's CFO Leadership Council program, Cybercrime 2.0, AI, Money Mules, and the new wave of corporate financial fraud. We're so honored that you chose to be here with us today. And a special thanks to FT Shore, today's exclusive webinar sponsor. My name is Stephanie with the CFO Leadership Council, and I'll be facilitating today's session. A quick shout out to my team working their magic behind the scenes. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Your lines are muted, but we encourage all your questions and reactions. Reaction options are at the bottom of your screen. The question section is in the dashboard. Add them there, and I'll ask them on your behalf during the Q&A portion at the end. As you address your tech stack, our Finance and Accounting Tech Briefing may be a great resource. It gives you the pulse on the latest tech. The session, What's in Your Tech Stack, is my personal favorite. Visit our site to subscribe today. 90% of our finance teams feel under-equipped to make financial technology decisions. That's why we've partnered with industry leaders to create 10 module certificate that covers the full spectrum of technologies and AI in finance. Visit fate.com to learn more. The Finance and Accounting Technology Expo will be back in the Javits Center this November 18th and 19th in New York City. We've also just announced Paralympic athlete and motivational speaker and former Navy SEAL Dan Kozin, who will be keynoting in the expo. Be sure to also swing by FTC's booth at Fate. Look at the chat for more information. Now, on to the big reason we've gathered today. A warm welcome to our amazing guest speaker, Dina White. The floor is all yours.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to meet you. And like Stephanie said, thank you for sharing your Friday afternoon with us to go through Cybercrime 2.0. I'm so happy that you're here. You can't talk about fraud enough. Fraud should always be at the forefront of your mind. It never hurts to continue to talk about it. I've been at EFT Shore, Electric Funds Transfer, that's what that stands for over 2 years now. I've personally worked with hundreds of companies nationally and globally and heard firsthand their interactions with fraudsters and their experiences. And it's really been clear, especially in 2025, how fraud has ramped up with the use of AI in 2025, where personally I've worked with folks who've experienced voice cloning scams, Teams video chats hacked into, and Teams messages hacked into, phones hacked into, and AI robots who are trying to defraud our customers. And so that's what we're really here to talk about today, is the future of fraud. The future of fraud is here, and it's advancing wildly fast. So hopping into it, I don't need to tell you that fraud is exploding. I think everybody knows that cybercrime is exploding. 56% of all US companies were impacted last year. There's a new one every 39 seconds. And business email compromise, Cyber 1.0, if you will, is still the leading cause of fraud. And every incident is worth about $126K on average. And that's just the frauds that are reported to the FBI. Not everybody reports because of the reputational damage associated with that. And in addition, if you've ever experienced a fraud before, you know that the dollar amount of that fraud is just the starting point. You may have legal fees involved, you may have IT forensic costs, you may be fighting it for over a year trying to get some money back. And it can really make a bigger impact on your team and also the amount of revenue you need to offset that fraud. Fraud is also ramping up from the migration from check to ACH. I think most folks have moved over to ACH, but are still paying a good bit by check. Some are just starting that journey. This migration is really caused by a need for automation, and checks are expensive. But what a lot of folks don't realize as they switch from check over to ACH or wire, that there are only two types of frauds that impact check that don't impact ACH. That's forgery and lost or stolen checks. Nobody can steal an ACH from the mail. But the types of fraud that target digital payments like ACH and wire tend to be much more sophisticated. What they have in common is that They have convinced you or your team that these are the correct banking details you need to send the payment to. They have manually changed the banking details on your invoices or documents, or hacked into your ERP, or they use software to do those things en masse. Why is fraud also rampant? The banks are doing absolutely everything they can, of course, to prevent fraud, but the responsibility falls back on the company itself to do those verifications of banking details. The banks are really front and center, and they say things like, you agree we're not responsible for an erroneous payment, including any caused by any errors made by you in providing the information to us, such as an inaccurate account number. Or even Wells Fargo kind of gets to the heart of it a bit more, saying, if an order describes the person to receive the transfer, so the beneficiary, inconsistently by name and account number, the transfer may be made on the basis of the account number, even if the account number identifies a person different from the beneficiary. So they're not making sure necessarily that the bank account name and number match. That responsibility falls back on your team to verify the banking details. So let's talk about Cyber 1.0 first, real quick. So Cyber 1.0 really has to do with business email compromise. Email is the #1 cause of fraud. Why? How we communicate with our vendors tends to be over email. How we onboard vendors today tends to be over email. We reach out to them, we send them an ACH form, maybe they send us back their banking details, or maybe they send us an invoice. We forward that to a colleague, and every time that email is forwarded and sent, it's another opportunity to be hacked into and manipulated. So what do we do about it? First of all, we get our IT involved, and our IT starts to secure our systems. They put in anti-malware software, they scan for phishing emails, things like that. But phishing emails still come through. So what do? We train our staff. Staff need to be trained not to click on phishing emails. Now, the chief legal officer of Microsoft says it well when he says every company has at least one employee who will click on anything in an email, at least once, which I think we all know is true. But the real risk today is not you or your staff so much as it is also your suppliers and their staff. And you have no control over your suppliers and what they do. So if one of your suppliers clicks on a phishing link, unbeknownst to yourself, there could be a fraudster inside their legitimate email inbox who you are communicating with back and forth. I've worked with folks who've communicated with fraudsters for over 3 months before either party realized that their email had been hacked into. So we know we can't trust the banking details. I hope at least everyone here knows they can't trust the banking details that come over email. So what do? The best recommended practice in-house is to do callback controls, which is don't trust the email coming in. Instead, we need to call a verified person and confirm the banking details with them. The issue is that the callback control process is still extremely manual and human-centered. And it's usually performed by AP teams who are not necessarily trained on the most recent scams and frauds. And it's a little counterintuitive to their main job. Their main job is to get payments out the door and get them out quickly. And yet here they are having to verify banking details, which causes some friction. But let's talk about the biggest gaps. You call a vendor, you leave a voicemail, they call you back to provide their banking details and confirm. Well, what do our voicemails do today? They forward to our email. So that fraudster receives it, they call you back. Are they sourcing the phone number independently? They can't source it from an email. So what are you supposed to do? For a new vendor, you're supposed to go to the website, call the main line, get transferred. Well, fraudsters know that. So what do? They build fake websites to impersonate your vendors. I can't tell you how often this happens. So how do you know it's the right website? Number 5, I worked with personally probably, 5+ companies in the last year or so who, for a change request, you can call the phone number you have on file. Well, the fraudsters can hack into that phone line and reroute that phone call. So even though they called the phone number they had on file and was the right number, the phone call had been ported to forward to themselves. And why does that happen? Our phone calls are through the internet now. So much of our phone systems are Wi-Fi based, so they can be hacked into too. I don't know why it took me forever to realize number 6. I worked with somebody in April. They called the vendor. It was the real vendor, truly the vendor. The vendor was a bad actor at their company. They provided their own banking details. And so how do you know that the banking details that you're being provided really belong to that vendor, even when you're talking to the right person? Never mind this world of AI that we're in now. Not only are phone lines being hacked, but voices are being cloned and videos are being cloned and recreated as well. So these are the main areas of fraud still. So business email compromise, supplier email compromise, executive fraud, where they impersonate a leader at your company or another company, and internal fraud. But artificial intelligence is making all of these different fraud types much more sophisticated and introducing new ones. Yet the procedures that we have in place to combat them are all very human-centered. The biggest argument you'll hear me make today is just we live in this increasingly digital world. We're making digital payments, yet that payment process and the verification process is all human-centered. It is not designed to stand up to the way technology is advancing, which brings us to Cyber 2.0. Some examples of the way AI is influencing fraud is document manipulation in bulk, voice cloning, and video recreation. If you look on the dark web, there are some scammer kits for dummies. The point of this is that it's really cheap to start trying to defraud a company. For $127, you can get all of these different Trojan softwares and malware tools publicly available on the internet. But it gets more sophisticated than that. So there is this tool called an invoice swapper tool on the dark web. What this is a fraudster has hacked into your supplier's email. They're inside the inbox, sitting pretty, hiding in there, patiently lurking. Before, they would have had to wait for an invoice to be sent and manually manipulate the invoice just to put their own bank account number on there. They do that today all the time. Now there's an invoice swapper tool where they install this tool, and for every incoming and outgoing invoice, they can swap that account number in bulk. So they don't even need to do anything. And the thing with fraudsters is that, well, you all have to be 100% perfect in defending against fraud. It just takes one incident and that's it, you fall victim. But fraudsters can fail 99.9% of the time. They just need to be successful once. So when they have tools like this in their pocket, it increases their odds that they're able to win. And how much does this cost? This is what it looks like when you purchase it on the dark web. Prices for rent, 7 days, $2,000, 15 days, $3,000, 30 days, $5,000, and a lifetime, $15,000. It might sound like a lot to the average Joe, but fraudsters are not guys in the basement with hoodies anymore. Hollywood has done us a disservice. These are actually real companies. They have HR teams, they hire, they pay 6-figure salaries. They're corporations. These are some that are well known amongst the hacker community, where their entire purpose is to defraud you. And the tools that they use are really sophisticated. They might be similar to the tools that we all use at our companies today. But how do they know how to steal your identity, how to impersonate you? Well, they have CRMs that look like this, where they map out who you are, what your leadership role is, how you're connected to other people in your organizations, what your payment process might be like, and who your suppliers are. What's that interweb of connectedness? They've always been doing this, but they've had to do it manually in the past. They've had to pull in information from tools you might use, like LinkedIn, Dun and Bradstreet, and ZoomInfo. But now with AI, they don't have to do it manually. There are AI agents who can pull all this information in within seconds. And those AI agents will then deploy spear phishing campaigns and emails, and they'll continue to learn and iterate on this. So again, what is happening with AI? It's a similar fraud that's always been happening, but it's increasing the likelihood and chances that you'll fall victim because it's happening at scale. Never mind voice cloning or vishing. So instead of phishing, vishing, voice cloning there. But this is well and alive in 2024. I was reading about it on the internet, as I think we all were. In 2025, I worked personally with 4 companies that experienced a voice cloning scam. One of which, the CFO's cell phone, was hacked. He didn't have access to his cell phone all day long. He didn't think anything of it besides that there was some outage with Verizon. And then this was actually a personal fraud, but they had called his bank, asked for a transfer of funds, cloned his voice, approved it, and the only reason that it didn't go through was he had 2-factor authentication and he received an email letting him know about the transfer. So he was able to call from another phone number to stop it. But if that email had been hacked into and compromised, it would have been done in that case. And I think we've all started to hear about the video recreation frauds, where in this case, a fraudster, basically the person in charge of mergers and acquisitions at this company joined a Zoom meeting, and her entire board was on that meeting, including her boss, who is the CFO, and every single person was a deep fake recreation. They ended up losing $25 million to this orchestration. 1 year later, they did an interview, and what did they say? The fraud itself was pretty similar. It was a social engineering fraud, but the technology was advanced. So instead of impersonating that person over email, they had tools to not only impersonate them over email, which they did, but to impersonate them over video as well, and to impersonate a whole team of people over video. I know we have a lot of CFOs on the call today. What does that mean? A cybercrime prevention strategy should not fall solely on your IT. IT is the front door, but it's ultimately the CFO's responsibility as the back door to protect your payments. Your most valuable asset is your dollars. So with 99% of cybercrime financially motivated, a single incident can bankrupt a business. So the CFO must lead the strategy on preventing fraud. And there are 3 types of mindsets folks in finance leadership tend to have. There's the passive mindset, which is if it happens, we can weather the cost, we can weather the storm, but it's not going to happen. It hasn't happened before, so it's not worth the investment now. My employees are really well trained. They wouldn't fall for a scam. So that's the passive mindset. Then we move a little up into the defender mindset, and it says, well, our IT has already invested so much in prevention. We've trained our employees on processes, and we put processes and callback procedures in place. Everybody knows those. So we feel good with our defender. But the attacker mindset is really mimicking what the fraudsters are doing. They're always in this attacker mindset, which is that, hey, we have a lot of vulnerabilities. The process we depend on today is very human-centered. It just takes one of those people to be off one day and they miss one step in a 12-step process, and then you fall victim. And so we need to be future-proofing our financial controls to prevent cybercrime. Why else, besides being proactive in prevention, is there are some compliance mandates coming out. I think probably everyone's heard that NACHA is coming out with some compliance mandates starting in March 2026, rolling through to June 2026. Basically what these are is that fraud has been really too rampant on the ACH network, and so NACHA is enforcing some compliance regulations around account validation in order to continue to prevent fraud. So if you're paying by ACH, you need to comply. All right, so that's a little bit of background on Cybercrime 2.0, but I know you're also here to say, hey, Deanna, I know fraud is growing rampant. I know that we're not prepared for the future of fraud. How do we prevent it? So cybercrime at a very high level is a joint effort between finance and IT. And again, there are all these cybersecurity tools that are on the market, many of which you have in place, anti-malware software, scanning for phishing emails, etc. But as finance teams, the tools you have in place tend to be, well, we had an 8-step process, something went wrong, and now it's a 12-step process. Or we pick up our phone and call, and for lack of a better term, it can be like bringing a knife to a gunfight. So our goal at EFT Shore is to secure the gap between these two and to really bridge the gap. And it's to bring your financial controls into the digital age, which brings us to what does EFT Shore do? EFT Shore, our goal is not to overhaul your current procure to pay process. If anything, it's to mirror it as closely as possible, but just automate and secure the manual moments within it. What are the manual moments? They usually start with onboarding, where when you're onboarding a vendor, it's happening over email. So how do we automate and secure that process? Verifications of those banking details and checking payments before they go out the door. I'll get into a little bit more detail, but we can always schedule a demo after if you're interested to really get into the nitty gritty. What we are working toward though is a payment file and a vendor master file with a red light, green light system or super intuitive system. So a green thumb says, we are good to make this payment. At a bare minimum, there's a 4-way cross match between the bank account name of that vendor and their official business name, their account number and their routing number, and a TIN match with the IRS in the US, but we also do this globally. And a red thumb says at a bare minimum, one of those 4 things is off. Do not make this payment. This payment cannot go out the door. Who do we do this for? We've been in business for over 10 years. By far, we're the world's largest payment fraud prevention solution. We have over 4,000 customers today. We protect hundreds of billions of dollars of payments. Most significantly, though, what I think is most significant is that we onboard and verify 21,000 new vendors every single month. So we're doing this. That is our focus. And our customers are really, 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 really diverse. I joke that they have almost nothing in common. What they do have in common, though, jokes aside, is that everybody has a target on their back for fraud, and everyone's payment process is extremely manual and human-centered. And we work with some of the tiniest nonprofits in the world to some of the biggest Fortune companies as well. How do we do this? I'm not going to give everything away in this webinar. We don't have time for it. But what we'll focus on is verification and kind of the high-level overview of the workflow of how we protect your payment lifecycle. In order to have secure payments going out, you of course need to have correct data coming in. So where we start with our customers is the existing data that they're sitting on today. If I asked you, like I often ask folks, when is the last time you've gone through a deep cleanse of your vendor master data? I usually get a little chuckle and it says, oh, maybe never. Or last time we upgraded our ERP, and that's been 7 years. So we'll go through, we usually recommend you inactivate anyone you haven't paid in the last 18 months, but then we'll go through and clean the rest of your data. So we look for incorrect bank account numbers. Is a bank account closed? Is the TIN correct today? Did they go through a merger and no one told you? Are there duplicates in there? Did someone put a nickname in 10 years ago, but it's not really the official business name? Fraudsters love these gray areas. Let's get where your baseline is today, clean and green. This is our dashboard. So when your team logs in, this is what they look like. There's some action items up top, but for the purpose of today, all you need to know is that this donut chart represents your vendor master file. Green represents verified, good to pay. Red represents something's wrong, don't make that payment. And orange means it has not been verified yet. How do we turn an orange or a red to a green? Is the same process we use at really 3 key moments in the payment lifecycle. A new vendor onboarding, a change request when your team gets an email out of the blue that says, hey, we're updating our banking details. I think we all know that's the highest risk moment in this entire life cycle, is that out of the blue email, and is it legitimate? And then if you're still paying by check today, have vendors that you'd like to move over to ACH or wires, we can help automate and secure that transition to do it en masse for you. And at these 3 moments, they're getting verified. So what does that mean? So first, we take, as before I get into verification, I guess, the onboarding, change requests, and check to ACH transitions, we move them off of email and into a secure portal. If you're interested in more what that looks like, again, we can talk afterwards, but you can create a flexible, automated, custom vendor onboarding form that gets issued to your vendor for them to self-service onboard themselves. as an example, in a secure environment. Onboarding portals are a good place to start. They help reduce risk, but fraudsters access portals all the time. If the link is getting sent out over email, guess who's in the email? The fraudster. So we don't, EFT Shore, that's just a start of what we do. It's about risk reduction and automation, but our main focus, our bread and butter, is on multi-layered verification. I say multi-layered because one size does not fit all for verifications. Really, we have to go through multiple processes to verify your vendor and do it quickly, quicker than you can in-house. But our commitment to you is that we will verify 100% of your vendors. These vendors can be domestic or global. We verify globally across all 200 countries. I won't get into the details of all of these verification methods. I can go through the first one with you, which is an instant cross match. More than, like, if they go through this first method or second method, that verification very well might be instantaneous. So what is that? EFT Shore, again, we're the leading fraud prevention solution. We've been in business over 10 years globally. What that means is we have verified 21,000 vendors per month for the last 10 years, which means we have verified over 35 million vendors who are pre-verified. It is therefore really likely that you pay the same vendor, your neighbor pays, their neighbor pays, instant cross match, immediate green thumb, you're good to go. In that way, when our customers sign on, not only do they sign on to protect themselves, but they join a like-minded community protecting one another. The same for a blacklist, though. So when we flag a fraud, whether that is a bad email domain, bad IP address, bad website, and of course, bad banking details, bad business, of which we flagged hundreds of thousands for our customers over the years, it gets added to a community blacklist. So last year, we know for a fact we prevented $50 million worth of bad payments before they were sent for our customers. But one of the vendors being impersonated, 300 other customers of ours also pay them. Let's say you were one of those. If you input those bad banking details, you would have gotten an instant red thumb. And so in that way, again, when you sign on, not only do you sign on to protect yourself, but you join a like-minded community protecting one another. It's kind of like a herd immunity. In addition to our own database, we partner with global databases. So Nacho, we're a preferred partner of them. They have a Fixius database. Some of you might have heard of early warning services. This name is not always used. Sometimes it's bank account validation services provided by your bank, or GIACT as an example, but it's all the same database. It's a consortium of 7 of the biggest banks in the US and several smaller banks that cross-share customer data. We'll partner with them and global partner databases worldwide. Now, these databases are a really, really, really good starting point. But if anyone uses one of them today, some of you might already use an account validation service through your bank. What you tend to find is it's still very manual, but the results, instead of a 100% green thumb like we offer you for our database, the results can be incomplete. They can say things like partial match or low risk or high risk. So unless it's a 100% match, then we'll give it a green thumb. Otherwise, if not, we carry on with verification. And again, we can take some time after this if you're interested to learn what our next 2 verification methods are and how we verify 100% of your vendors. Now, once we verify, your ERP is always your source of truth. So this data gets passed into your ERP. Only verified data for vendors is then passed into your ERP. And that is still should always be your source of truth. Finally, there is a common misconception, though, that fraud cannot happen after verification. There's no more room for fraud. Not true. It's the type of fraud we don't like to talk about, which is somebody's hacked into your ERP and they manipulated details. Actually, your controller went to the dark side and they put in their own banking details. Or oftentimes folks will download a payment file. It can be a Nacha file, a Fedwire file, whatever it is. These payment files are just text files. So once they're downloaded, they can be manipulated by a human or they can be manipulated by a software. I spoke with someone the other week. She was like, I edit that thing all the time. But also we have had a customer that had a Trojan software on their desktop that was programmed to automatically change the account numbers before that file went to the bank. So the last thing we do at EFT Shore, again, we can show you this some more, but we check your payment file before it goes to the bank for ultimate peace of mind. Ideally, you should just have green thumbs the whole way down your payment run, and you feel complete peace of mind when you hit send on that batch. But God forbid there is something wrong, we'll give you a big fat red thumb, say do not pay, this account has closed since you last paid them. Or this one failed verification and here's why. Or a yellow one means somebody internally has either accidentally or intentionally bypassed verification and you are about to pay an unverified vendor. So this is really for complete peace of mind for whoever approves the payment that everything is correct going out the door and it matches what's been previously verified. Now, the question that I'm always asked, Deanna, have you issued a green thumb that should have been red? Has that ever happened? In our 10 plus years of business, this has not happened, but never say never. We just talked about Cybercrime 2.0 and how scary and sick it is. So what does that mean for us? We stand behind our verifications with a guarantee. Our EFT Shore guarantee means that when we give you a green thumb on that payment, we will guarantee that payment and indemnify it up to $1 million as well. Our goal is to never have to use this, but it's for peace of mind for you and for us, and it's really putting our money where our mouth is. So overall, our goal again is not to overhaul your current procure to pay. It's really just to automate and secure the manual moments, especially around onboarding, change requests, transitions, and checking payments before they go out the door. Security is why folks use us, but hopefully it saves you a whole bunch of time. We did a study with KPMG. For every new onboarding or change request, it's to save about 30 minutes. Colloquially, for check to ACH, it saves more like 45 minutes to an hour. That's a big task for your team to do. And if you were truly doing it right at the end of the day, you would check every payment line item one by one by one. Most folks bypass that control. I talked to someone though the other day, they do this twice. But it would save you an hour for every 60 payment lines. And this is just coming from some of our customers and the time that they get back in their weeks, their months, their days, and the security they feel. And overall, EFT Shore is designed to be a comprehensive solution to really eliminate payment fraud and make sure that your payments always go to your legitimate vendor or payee. We verify both businesses and individuals, I should say. All right. And that's where we'll head off. Or I can leave you with one of our customers who says, where does cyber risk sit in the priorities for a CFO? They had experienced a fraud before they started using us. I recommend being more proactive. But he said, number one priority for a CFO is cash. Shoulder to shoulder with cash is that no one inappropriately takes that cash. And at the end of the day, that's cyber risk. Thanks for letting me chat with you about Cyber 2.0. I'll pass it back to Stephanie.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions that I would like to dig into, and I would love to start with what is the most critical cybercrime that happens over and over and people are still losing money over these crimes?
Definitely. Honestly, that Cyber 1.0, the business email compromise, happens over and over. There's different levels of sophistication with business email compromise. I think we're all really familiar with the weird email with the poor grammar that smells like a fraud from a million miles away. We've moved beyond that. What are fraudsters doing? They hack into your colleague's email, they hack into your supplier's email. So you're really communicating with a legitimate email. Sometimes they create a lookalike email. They'll switch out a lowercase L with an uppercase I. And folks are repeatedly telling me that their email chains have been hijacked midway. And so while they've been communicating legitimately with a vendor, they'll get an injected email that is one letter off in the domain that appears to continue that conversation, but it's actually the fraudster. I have worked with two companies that ideally they had wanted to implement EFT Shore at the end of Q2 in 2025. These companies similarly had poor Q2 results, not what they expected. They needed to wait for a little bit for budget, and they ended up implementing in Q4 2025. Both companies, this is just really coincidental, but they had experienced a second fraud in between Q2 to Q4. And it had to do with email compromise. And again, it just takes those one times to fall victim.
I mean, they're getting so creative. I think the last time one of our coworkers was their LinkedIn got hacked. So uh, it's getting personal.
It is, and we often use things. I know I talked about callback controls as being one method, but sometimes folks are collecting bank letterheads signed by the bank president, things like that. And this one company, it was a fake bank letterhead. You can Photoshop, but AI can make that Photoshop perfect today. It looks exactly right too. And so some of those things that used to hold some value don't hold value anymore.
Yeah. We do have another question coming in from the audience, and this one is about, are you finding embezzlement cases or primarily third-party fraud? What areas encounter the most AP/expense reports examples?
Yeah, it's a mix. I'd say I hear mostly about third-party fraud, and that's mostly what's reported on. That being said, when it comes to internal fraud, companies are really embarrassed by that. So they don't always publicly share it. And so I have worked with companies that they're like, yes, we have this situation with our controller, and so on and so forth. We do have one customer, and I'll just be transparent. It was a customer that had spoken to us. They were kind of in that passive mindset, or maybe in the defender mindset instead of the attacker one. And they said, hey, we feel really good about our internal controls. We don't think we need this. And that's okay. 6 months later, they came back though, and they said, we had an internal fraud, which are the most difficult to detect. And what happened was a high up person, a director at that company who had been well respected, promoted multiple times, had been going over to his AP person and saying, hey, we have this urgent payment. Can you please help me get this out the door? And because of the level of difference in power, she would do it because it was her boss or her boss's boss. Now, they were duplicate invoices. They looked to be going to a real vendor, but they had his spouse's bank account information on it. And the vendors never said anything because, again, they were duplicate invoices, so they were still being paid. And so something that we actually recommend, especially if you're in finance leadership, try that out as a test. I think we all think our teams are really well trained, but we all like to please our bosses. And so if you were to go create a fake invoice and ask for a vendor to be onboarded to one of your colleagues, see what they would do. See like if they would follow that process to a T, or if they might skip some steps because of that.
That is such a hard situation, and I love the practical insight that you just gave to everyone to just, give it a test, see what everyone how their team responds.
It's a good training opportunity.
Yeah, of course. Let's go on to question number 3. When those fake CFO wire request emails actually get paid, how do the authorities charge? How do they get it back? What actually happens?
Ooh, most folks don't get it back. That is the unfortunate thing, is that once it's sent, basically the fraudsters are on it like white on rice. And so they receive the funds, they pull the funds, or they disperse the funds through mule accounts, where they get spread globally into different accounts and become untraceable. That's typically what happens. Sometimes folks get lucky and the fraudster was snoozing, or maybe the authorities had already flagged something as weird with that bank account. And so, or the receiving bank maybe flagged something weird and froze the account. That's usually when folks get their money back. So I just worked with the city, public record, but they had experienced over 400K fraud. What they learned is they went to the authorities. The authorities told them they could only get the FBI involved if it was over 500K. So theirs was 440. So 500K is only when it gets to go to the FBI. And when they said, what are the chances that we get this money back? The police department, the local police department said, what is as close to 0% as possible? They were actually really lucky. The receiving bank froze the account, but they hadn't notified them. So for weeks, if not months, they were still trying to track it down before they were really lucky and it was still there. But usually folks aren't so lucky sometimes unless the fraudsters are snoozing or there's a whiff of a fraud already in the air that's being tracked by authorities. And then what that means, a lot of folks try to make a claim on their cyber insurance, which seems to have 50-50, maybe even less success rates. I would check your cyber insurance. Some cyber insurance have like clauses because technically nobody hacked into your bank to send that payment. Technically, you approved that payment. You input those banking details yourself, even though they were incorrect. And so there's kind of this carve out in cyber insurance where it doesn't pay because of that. Or sometimes cyber insurance has deductibles, and those deductibles are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and maybe your fraud was a 60K fraud, and so it's not reached. Or if the cyber insurance kicks in, your premiums really, really, really go up the following year. And so there's not like being reactive doesn't really have a lot of success. And so most folks find it's much better to be proactive in preventing fraud. They find that usually if an average fraud is 126K, depending on the size of your business and such, but folks can get EFT short for 5 to 10 years or, depending on your size, I guess, but it's much better to be preventative than reactive.
Of course, and we have one final question from the community, and this one's any specific banking products besides Positive Pay to request from our banks?
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about some banking products. There are things that you can put in place that are really good starting places. So Positive Pay largely encompasses checks. So when you send your checks out, it goes through the Positive Pay system. I will say, so we don't deal with like stopping check fraud because that would mean that we'd have to go prevent someone from robbing the mailbox. But Positive Pay is a good way for that. But make sure you also have, there's an additional layer to that check Positive Pay called payee name match. It's not inherent in Positive Pay. So you need the payee name match for them to match the name on the bank account to the name on the check. It's not foolproof. I've worked with folks where basically the people robbing the mailbox are not necessarily the people pulling off the scams. They sell them on the dark web. And so fraudsters, these cyber criminals, will create bank accounts in a different state under the same name. So it's not foolproof, but it's a really good layer to have. Somebody I worked with, the feds got involved and had noticed it, and they said that this cyber group had opened 10,000 bank accounts in the US in different names. So that's for checks. ACH, let's talk about ACH. There is ACH Positive Pay. It's more commonly known as ACH filters. These are for debits to your account. So this is not when you collect banking details from your supplier and you send it out to them. It's more so for like your bill pay and like your utilities or maybe your rent, where someone else is debiting your bank account. Pretty rare to have fraud that way, but basically you provide the bank a list that says these are the 10 companies that can do that. And if anyone tries to that's not on that list, it'll get flagged. The final thing, I mentioned one of our verification methods is this one bank consortium database called Early Warning Services. Some of the banks resell this, PNC, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, the bigger banks. And you can do a little bit about, like you can check that database at the very least. We have a lot of folks who start there and move over to EFT Shore because what they've found is that it's still really manual and they're still doing callbacks at a bare minimum for the ones that don't say 100% match. And at a maximum, they still do them for all of them anyway. And it's only for checking that bank account. It does not automate onboarding. It does not check payments. But it's a good place to start if you're looking just to start.
I would love to close out this conversation with asking you if you have any final thoughts to leave our community with, any recommendations that they can apply right away. Yeah, kind
Yeah.
of pick your brain.
I think my final thought is really moving from those passive or defender mindsets into attacker mindsets. It's so crucial. Like I said at the very beginning, you cannot talk about fraud enough. And moving into that attacker mindset of saying we have to future proof our controls and we have to take the human element out of our controls is the most important thing. I think everyone here knows that humans are the weak point in any ecosystem. So how do we move into that attacker mindset, especially as a leader who is responsible for equipping your team with the tools to do their job right and to do it well?
Thank you. And thank you all for connecting with us today. A very special nod to Dina and, of course, the entire EFT Shore team. This is just the start of a conversation, a very important conversation, may I add. If anything piqued your interest, please connect. Also, look for a post-event email, which will give you a link to the presentation, the full recording, and more info on EFT Shore. This does conclude today's program. Until next time, stay well and stay connected.
Thank you all. Looking forward to maybe speaking with you for some follow-ups afterward. Have a great rest of your Friday.